Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen. Welcome everybody to a new episode of the Steve Keen Show. I think we might have to update it to the Steve Keen Show, but anyways, we're COVID and climate correlations, and today's a little bit of a free-for-all, but on topics. One activity that I thought we could do is look at a couple videos on the internet, and I don't know if Scott and Steve are both open to this, but I had a Nordhaus video.
Oh, that'll be fun. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't going into great depths. It's only 4 minutes, and
let's watch him. Why not?
Okay, and then I also have Shapiro talking about climate change, and I before we jump into it, I wanted to say that I can see what Steve is talking about now. I can really see the shortfalls or the shortfall and the foundations that our politicians and thought leaders are basing their foundations on. So that's the Shapiro piece. But in the meantime, let's listen to William, and just give me a second while I pop that up.
So in our daily activities, when we drive a car, heat our home, use a telephone, each of these has effects on the climate because it leads to emissions of things that are called greenhouse gases.
And I have to pause, everybody. Are those children's books behind him?
No idea.
Kind of look like he's in a children's library behind him, but anyways.
Yeah, economics textbook, same thing.
Particularly CO2, carbon dioxide. Those then get into the atmosphere and change the climate. It's a very slow process, but billions of people are taking millions of decisions over decades and decades. It adds up to a lot. So this has been known for many years, but we now have our models of economy and climate so we can track economic growth in different countries and the effect that has on climate now and into the distant future. So then the next linkage is back on the economy, which is as the climate changes, this leads to impacts in different areas. For example, as the climate warms, there will be certain effects on agriculture, particularly in warm areas, that the crops may not grow so well. In the coastal areas, there will be rising ocean levels. There's also will be issues such as more intense hurricanes and therefore more damaging hurricanes. And the list goes on and on. So you see the economy affects the climate, but the climate comes back. It's not just the economy, it's actually the economy plus things we do in our daily life. Could be health effects, could be vector-borne diseases that spread because they're in hot areas, and then also on the natural world through affecting our forests, our ecosystems, perhaps our species of different kinds such as birds. The linkage then is to link them. What we want to do is link that so we change our economic structure to slow the emissions, to reduce the damages. And so what we've done in our economic modeling, it's not just the work I've done, but people around the world in mainly different universities, but also different institutes, has been to build models that make these linkages precise, make them build on good empirical studies, good science, good economics, good observation, good data, good physics, and to actually be able to understand as best we can how these linkages operate and what they actually look like, not just qualitatively in the way that I'm talking, but quantitatively so you can actually figure out what the effects are going to be. And then also quantitatively in terms of policies, what kind of policies we need to try to contain the rapid and slow the rapid growth of climate. So that's what I and many of my colleagues have been working on now for many years. we're now waiting for governments to take actions. I think it's clear what we need to do. We need to raise the price of carbon through a carbon tax or a cap and trade system. So our governments need to get with it. They need to really get on board and to take the steps. And then when that happens, the people, the firms, the companies, the researchers, the universities, the profit-making entities will begin to respond, and we will find that curve of carbon emission and the curve of climate damage tilting down. So that's what we hope to do.
Yeah, that was exciting. Yeah.
Okay.
That reminded me of what Talbonek said today. We were talking about Hitler and Trump, and he said, people, and Goebbels, he said Goebbels explains Hitler and Trump. People like simple explanations, ideally 3 words, X is Y. So the response to this from the right would be, climate change is bullshit, and then that would be enough. People hate complexity and thought building. That was my first thought after seeing this. Like, I can imagine a Trump redneck watching the video and thinking, "What a bunch of bullshit." Because it's a multi-part answer. It requires you have to make a constellation of ideas, and you're drawing a diagrammatic understanding. I'm not going to do that bullshit. Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson says it's bullshit, and I think it's just whoever says it with most confidence is the guy who's going to win. So that's the other thing, is that confidence is replacing truth now. I mean, the confident delivery with the right kind of a dismissive, aloof attitude really is charismatic, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other part that I focus on, of course, is the idea of being built on good empirical data, and that is an absolute load of garbage. That's what I've been exposing by simply reading him and reproducing what he's actually written as whether that's good empirical data or not. I'm giving a talk at the OECD today, actually, in about I think about 5 or 6 hours time, and so I've been putting together yet another presentation on the nonsense of their estimates of damages and so on.
Before you bring that up, Steve, I thought about this guy. Have you guys heard about that neurologist by the name of Fallon? His last name's Fallon, and he discovered through PET scans PET scans that he's a psychopath.
I think I did see that story. Yeah. A sociopath, I think, actually.
Or sociopath. So, really interesting. And he also said that we, and this goes to Scott's point, we kind of vote in those strong, dominating, leaders. Like somehow they're just naturally say leader to us, right? Type of thing. So I don't know if it's like this hawks and doves scenario where you need so many of those in the population, but I mean, we're already trying to engineer it out. So
we're stuck with the sociopaths running the story. Here's the good empirical data. This is a quote from his 1991 paper. The sensitive sectors, agriculture, which he mentioned in the talk, others carefully controlled environments that will not be directly affected by climate change. And he says 87% of American industry. And so for the bulk of the economy, manufacturing, mining, utilities, finance, trade, and most service industries, it is difficult to find major direct impacts of the projected climate change over the next 50 to 75 years. That's what he calls good data. It's, to me, there's so much cover that he's getting out of this because people don't go in and take a detailed look, and they simply accept that he's got his numbers in a valid way, that he's actually reading the science. It's a travesty.
Can you summarize what he said in that video? Because actually, I just woke up and I heard the first 3 words, and the rest of it I didn't. I just kind of dozed out. So what exactly was his agenda in that speech?
Well, it's just saying, we're working out what's necessary, and it's the politicians' fault they haven't followed our advice, fundamentally. But of course, what their advice says is that if you don't do something about climate change, the growth rate is going to drop from 1.45% per annum to 1.44% per annum.
So he's better than nothing, but he's wrong about what he's saying. He's
Well,
underrepresenting the crisis.
Yeah, he's trivialized the crisis and then saying, "Oh, they haven't reacted to my trivial numbers." Yes, they have. They've done nothing. Okay, so I mean, this is just one more quote from the IPCC report written by one of his compradors, Richard Toll, and this one says, let's see, hang on, economic activities such as agriculture, forestry. Oh, hang on, somebody else is presenting apparently. Is that right?
No, you're up there. You probably were still up there last time. Yeah, we can see. Okay. Agriculture, forestry, fisheries are exposed to the weather and thus vulnerable to climate change. Other economic activities such as manufacturing and services largely take place in controlled environments. That's a quote from Nordhaus from 23 years before this was written, and are not really exposed to climate change. And so that nonsense means that they end up with results where they say like a 3-degree increase in temperature. His first estimate of the impact of a 3 degrees Celsius, which is say 5 degrees Fahrenheit increase in global temperature, was that it would reduce GDP by 0.25% by the year 2100. Okay, so if climate change, if we had a planet where climate change didn't occur, the GDP on that planet would be 0.25% higher than on a planet where climate change caused a 5 degree Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures. And then they're wondering, and then they get, well, the cost of carbon should be, $40 a ton or something like that to prevent that happening. And politicians look at it and say, $40 a ton, what will that mean at the pump? That'll mean I don't get elected. Okay, well, it's not going to matter anyway if I don't do anything. And this is the sort of logic.
Right, that's right.
It pisses me off beyond belief that these bastards are using, saying, well, we've come up with these prices of carbon and the politicians haven't done it. So it's the politicians' fault. The price of carbon should be, given the damages that we're now about to approach, the price for carbon is close to infinity. And they're saying, they haven't made it if they'd made it $40, we wouldn't be in this situation. But they've actually delayed us for half a century in taking meaningful action. And I'm sure when it starts to become disastrous, they'll start saying, the politicians had listened to our advice, we wouldn't be here. The politicians did listen to your advice, and that's why we are here.
Yeah.
So what about the other one? You said another video for us to watch.
Okay. Let me just say that what he was saying it sounds reasonable, because you'd imagine, yes, in my imagination, I see miners living in like a Philip K. Dick underground city. They can go to and from the mines in their city without having to go on the surface. And also, people in the Amazon factory, there's air conditioning, isn't there? So I think when he says this, people feel like, that makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. And like it's this sort of, people have a child's understanding of manufacturing, a child's understanding of the climate, and therefore getting a childish statement from an economist like that looks like, he's doing seriously good work. Yeah. But in fact, it's below a child's level in understanding. And if you just hear the generalities, we're working out change in the climate and working out that affects the economy, and then that comes back to the climate, and then we can change the price and that'll reduce the damages. It all sounds eminently reasonable until you read the fine print. And I seem to be the only person in economics who reads the bloody fine print and go and say, so you're assuming a roof will prevent climate change affecting you. You're assuming that the current temperature to GDP relationship across space will apply with over time with climate change. Therefore, a 10-degree increase in temperature is no big deal. You're mad. You're insane.
Steve, I want to ask you about that FAQ. Where did you pull that from? That FAQ? Where did you find that?
2014 IPCC report, the chapter on economic sectors, economic impact of climate change, chapter 10, I think, of the 2014 working group 2, I think, either 2 or 3. Yeah.
So that adds a lot of credibility to it. It's from the IPCC. So he was on a panel that was commenting or writing. No.
Nordhaus has been on a number of government committees in the United States. Yeah. So like very early commission. He was involved in a commission report way back in 19 70s, I think, which decided climate change was no big deal. And they had a lot of climate scientists saying it's extremely important. And the economic chapters, which wrote the introduction and wrote the conclusion fundamentally, basically buttressed the whole thing and said, oh, it's only, 3 degrees temperature, we might lose 2% of GDP. So yeah, it's a problem, but it's not as important as, and that list of things that was shown by the IPCC report is typical. But he hasn't actually been involved in the IPCC committees, but of course his followers like Richard Toll. Richard Toll was the co-author of that chapter. I can see Richard's fingerprints all over statements like that. But they're reproducing the mindset that Nordhaus first generated. And the point is that economists are climate change deniers, not in the sense they're saying that increasing CO2 won't increase temperature, but they've got this picture of capitalism as an infinitely flexible system. If you run out of energy, you can substitute with something else. And I'm not joking, I've heard that said, and that mindset, which is sort of a whiteboard understanding of the economy and the ecology, means that they trivialize the dangers. Say, well, capitalism can cope with anything, therefore climate change can't be an existential threat.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous. Yeah.
Maybe they're also assuming that, well, when it needs to be, capitalism will self-regulate.
Yeah, so fundamentally.
So as soon as the crisis comes, surely they'll coordinate and they'll make sacrifices to their profit margins in order to realize some end together in a regulated command style structure.
That they everything about setting the price, what they call the social cost of carbon, which is to put a price on carbon, and say let the price mechanism solve everything. It's in supply and demand we trust. That's the vision that they have. So they don't want any regulation apart from something which puts a price on what they see as what they call an externality, that producing carbon damages people who aren't part of the transaction that generates the carbon. Therefore, the price has to be higher than it would be for the market price. And that's all that neoclassical economic theory will allow. So that's all they want us to do. And then they've parameterized it in such a way that if you don't do anything and you simply allow like a 6-degree increase in, which is 6 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Fahrenheit, increase in temperature to occur, they're saying, well, GDP in 2100 will be maybe 3%, maybe 8% lower than it is now if that temperature increases by 2100 or 2200. So they're saying, we'll still have 90% of what we would have had without climate change. And if we do mitigation, then of course we can't have the mitigation cost more than 10% of GDP because that'd be inefficient.
Yeah,
right, they're leaving out the geometrical increase components of the crisis.
Well, they have no idea there is such a thing. I mean, like this talk I'm giving at the OECD today, doing it along with Matthias Griselli, and who's a mathematician, and Tim Lenton, who's a climate scientist. And we pulled apart DICE, is writing a critique for it for a journal. And we found that even if you hit it with catastrophic levels of damages that at some point left the economy at like 4% of its pre-global warming level, it would recover ultimately to be back and slightly higher than if we didn't have climate change, if you feed into the DICE model. So the DICE cannot generate a systemic crisis. Even if his damages function in the version of DICE we're playing with was so that the damages are 0.00236 times temperature difference squared, which is less than 0.25% times temperature squared. So if you have a 4 degree increase in temperature to cause almost a 1% fall in GDP, okay, compared to what it would be without climate change. Now, if you talk to people like Will Steffen, who's a climate scientist, he says a 4 degree increase in temperature will probably mean that the carrying capacity of the planet is about 1 billion humans or less, which means about 7 billion people are going to die. Now, I don't include that in an economy which is 1%, which is 1% smaller. But that's the way.
But after that island of billion people reorganizes, I mean, it may return to that graph. So there'll be a smooth graph, like they say, then a disaster, and 70% of the humans are dead. But then eventually, don't you think it's possible? I'm just kidding. That was a joke.
Yeah, I mean, what they actually have at some point because this is the function of the mathematical models they use. They use what's called a Cobb-Douglas production function, and that argues you can substitute labor for capital. The function he uses in DICE doesn't have energy input at all. So you have labor and capital producing output. Now you can get a capital output ratio coming out of that. Well, let's say an output to capital ratio, how much output per unit of capital. And the normal measure for that, when you actually go into empirically say, okay, what is GDP measured at? What is capital valued at? The ratio is normally 1 to 3. So if you have a $1 trillion economy, you normally find your capital stock is valued at 3 trillion, that sort of thing. So you get like a 33% productivity in capital to output. In his model, at the absolute crisis level, when we hit it with a damage is not of 0.23% per annum, but 20% per degree change. Okay, we hit it with that high of a level. When you hit the absolute bottom in output, his output to capital ratio is 20 to 1. In other words, for each dollar of capital, you produce $20 worth of output.
Yeah.
Now that's a miracle. Okay. And as in, we ain't had a God that good. Okay. That's never happened. But that's what comes out as an empirical prediction out of his model when we hit it with high damages, that capital will become 60 times as productive as it is during a crisis.
And what are the inputs that determine that ratio?
Just the fact they've got labor, and they say output is technology times labor times capital, where labor and capital are raised to powers that if you double both inputs, you double the output. That's what's called constant returns to scale. But what they assume, what Nordhaus assumes this, and all the other models I've seen do too, they assume that population continues rising. So they have an exogenous population which follows a logistic curve. So they pretty much predict that no matter what happens on the planet, human population will gradually taper to 10.5 billion people. And they have technological change going on without any damage either. So the technology factor, which grows exponentially, slows down a bit in the way Nordhaus has fudged these numbers together in DICE, but fundamentally it grows exogenously without any damage from climate change. Population grows without any damage from climate change. And climate change doesn't damage factories, it just damages the output from factories. And it's a small level of damages at that. And that's all built into the model.
Well, in a fantasy, part of that can be true, because you could imagine that the ruling class and their top engineers would kind of cordon themselves off in a safe space. They'll go to the Rockies and they'll bring all the Indians to the Rockies, and the CEOs will fly down there and they'll have water pumped in, and they really could. It would be like a dissipative structure in a cesspool. I mean, and so in a way, while all those things would be going down, I think it might be true that the technology class and the ruling class will kind of put themselves into an Epcot center and take care of themselves.
I think if the ruling class is following the advice of the economists, they won't have time to do that. There'll be survival bunkers. We know they're taking place. And that's what the wealthy be doing it in an isolated way, not in the sense of taking a manufacturing system with them.
Wow, that's pretty serious. Let's pause on that for a minute. So we think that that bunkers are an inevitability.
Well, they're already there. And if you go to, I mean, I'm not wealthy enough to fly around and check them out. But if you go to places like Utah, you'll find, just look for I can't think of what you actually search for, but high class bunkers or something of that nature on the internet. And you'll find companies selling them to people who want to have a survivability bolt hole to live in luxury if the world goes to hell in a handbasket. So they are already doing that. But you're not going to have a Tesla factory inside that bunker, okay?
That's a good point. By the way, Daniel and I are starting a series in 2 weeks. You know James Burke, the famous British popular writer? Oh, you don't know him. He did The Day the Universe Changed, and he did Connections. They were PBS things.
Okay, I haven't seen them. Okay,
oh, guys, so great. Anyway, so they open up with the bunker. They open up. They're talking about the things that cultures do to maintain their way of life. So he's talking about homeostasis and how homeostasis kind of brainwashes and socializes people to produce and organize their labor power in a certain way, and then the defense system that grows up around that. So he goes to a missile silo. He goes into a bunker where you have all the radar tracking people, and it's a real American bunker in the side of a mountain in Utah, I think.
Yeah.
And he goes, where does finally the command structure exist? You know, what is the logic of the social structure? And he takes us into a bunker, and it's like, oh wow, it's really great intro to the series.
Yeah. Well, see, some of those bunkers which have been decommissioned are now being made into luxury bolt holes for the wealthy.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow, that's it.
What they can provide all the life support elements, but they can't provide manufacturing. Okay? That's on a scale beyond anything you can put inside a bunker. So,
well, there could be mutants outside the bunker, and they could be producing things and then shipping them in on a underground conveyor belt where the other mutants are working.
That's called people with jobs, I think, as according to Chomsky, right? I loved a little dose of Chomsky. I was listening to him, and he was saying that, you know, if you have a job, it's servitude and you're a slave, right? So, I mean, I love Chomsky, right? But it just, he's a little hard to get to not, you know, he's a little hard to distance from, I think, you know, it's
yeah. So what about that other video you mentioned?
Oh, you're really into this video thing. Okay.
Check it out. Let's see what the other half.
He wants something interesting and intelligent to respond to. Let's play that video.
Yeah. Okay. So now this is Shapiro. Okay. And I know, but the reason why I put him up here is because
that makes me so angry. He makes me murderous.
Okay, so it's climate change. This one's more about capitalism. So he's more of a laissez-faire kind of.
Yeah, they all are.
That's his job.
Yeah.
These fuels are efficient. They just are. It that way. That's just the way things are. And if you're asking a family in the middle of sub-Saharan Africa not to use carbon-based emissions because you are worried about climate change in 100 years, while they are worried about literally their children dying from heat exhaustion, or they are worried about their children dying because they cannot use fossil fuels to power light bulbs, right? Because there have to be energy plants, right? That is first worldism at its best. Right? Those environment. I mean, it is a sad fact of human life that environmentalism is a first world concern. It is, because when you're trying to get by and make sure your kids don't die, this is last on your list of things that you care about. So if you really believe that you are going to cram down a carbon-free world on people who are literally, in many cases, burning animal dung for fuel, you got another thing coming. Okay, it also happens to be a pipe dream. When people say, oh, the Paris Accords, the wonderful Paris Climate Accords. We'll get to that in a second. But suffice it to say, China and India both signed on to the Paris Climate Accords. They are the world's leading carbon emitters. They're not going to lower their emissions anytime soon. Again, that is because if you are a developing country, you would like to become a developed country. And the way that you do that typically is by using carbon-based fuels. And as I say, the Paris Accords are a dud anyway. Dr. Bjorn Lomborg, climatologist, he found in his research that the Paris Accords would have done nothing about global temperature. He said, if we measure the impact of every nation fulfilling every promise by 2030, the total temperature reduction would be 0.048 degrees Celsius by 2100. Even if we assume these promises would be extended for another 70 years, there's still little impact. If every nation fulfills every promise by 2030 and continues to fulfill those promises until the end of the century, and there is no CO2 leakage to non-committed nations, the entirety of the Paris promises will reduce temperature rises by 0.17 degrees Celsius by 2100. In other words, most of the stuff is now baked into the cake. Right? The carbon that's in the air is going to stay in the air. By the way, it is worth noting that for all the criticism America has taken, our emissions have been falling steadily since 2000, at least 7.5% according to the EPA. In 2017, the US had the largest reductions in carbon dioxide emissions of any country on planet Earth. And adaptation is even a better solution, because it turns out humans are great at adaptation, which is why there are 7 billion of us on the planet. And one of the great ways that you adapt is through capitalism. Because one of the reasons that you are going to have a better world by 2100 than you have today, despite climate change, is that the economy is going to continue to grow by virtually every estimate. Warren Cass of the Manhattan Institute points out, regarding Nordhaus's model, by 2100, regardless of climate change, the entire world is more than 6 times wealthier than in 2015. Right? Because we keep getting better at doing stuff. Human beings get better at doing stuff. So should we build more seawalls? Absolutely. Should we take mitigating measures? Of course. And does that involve infrastructure building? Sure. But if we are talking about completely destroying the entire carbon-based economy in favor of unproven technologies that do not compete on a per capita level, people don't know what they're talking about. This is particularly true with regards to some pie-in-the-sky folks on the left. Now, you want to know how somebody is pro-science and somebody's anti-science? Ask them a quick question on global warming. should we get rid of natural gas and nuclear power? If their answer is yes, they are not serious about climate change. The entire American reduction in climate emissions is due to the substitution of natural gas for oil. The entirety. I'm sorry that carbon-based fuels are efficient. They just...
Yikes, hey?
Yeah, this is where the economists are giving talking points to climate change deniers, which is one of the points I'll be making in the OECD today. I mean, for example, on the gas versus nuclear, I'd say yes to gas and no to nuclear. Keep nuclear, okay? I've been well enough persuaded by my engineers that it's a lot safer than it was 40, 50 years ago, and that it could be a lot cheaper as well. And therefore, yes, we need base load and nuclear will do it, not gas. Now, lumping the two together, it was an intriguing little episode by him. But what they are saying, of course, the economy will be 6 times bigger by 2100. In other words, there are no serious consequences on the economy from climate change. And that's coming straight out of Nordhaus, Toll, Mendelssohn, and even, as I found out now, Gernot Wagner, who I had some time for before his most recent paper. So they're providing the talking points for climate change trivializers, climate change deniers.
Yeah, well, the conservative side is looking for a counterpointing argument, right? I mean, and they're going to scour, the literature and put their perspective on it, and then you can see it's pretty transparent. You can see these, trying to base it on something. He's standing in an awfully large auditorium speaking to, a lot of people,
a large audience, and this is what worries me about it, that. The extent to which this disinformation dominates concern about the climate is hellishly scary, because only if it is a trivial thing will they be right. Okay, so it's all dependent upon climate change having a trivial impact upon the planet. And I've realized when they say climate change, they're not actually tying it down to anything. So I've just read a recent paper by Dietz and 2 others and Wagner, where they supposedly measure the impact of tipping points on the economic output. And they have 8 tipping points they look at. And we're talking the biggies here. We're even talking permafrost going and ocean methane hydrates going, which are things which the scientists themselves have left out because I think that's not going to happen to at least a century. They think not for the permafrost, that may be happening now, but the ocean methane hydrates. So they have the Arctic gone, Greenland gone, West Antarctic gone, the AMOC, the Gulf Stream gone, and all these methane hydrates, the Indian monsoon made crazy by extra rainfall. And they say that at 6 degrees temperature increase, that'll reduce GDP by 1.4% compared to a world in which 6 degrees did not trigger any of those tipping points. And this is supposed to be a serious contribution to the literature. What it's saying is fucking ignore it.
Yeah.
Okay. They're not saying, you should put the carbon up, and say, yeah, we know what you're saying. Fucking ignore it. Right, we'll do that. And they're going to take that as cover. And I can just see when we, get a couple of countries wiped out by major storms, or, fire makes California uninhabitable, I'll say, well, they should have followed our advice and put the price up to carbon to $40, 20 years ago. If they'd followed our advice, everything would be fine. Bullshit. Your advice got us in this situation.
And then the minimizers will retroactively become the avant-garde. And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's been sickening enough watching them, delude us into racing full speed at the iceberg, so to speak. But to have them then claim they're the ones who rescued us, after we hit the iceberg, get the fuck out of the boat, okay? And that's why I'm trying so hard to raise the awareness about just how tragically bad their research is. And it says Shapiro saying the best science and best economics. This is garbage. I mean, I thought I'd have to pull apart complicated mathematical models and excessive discount rates to make the case that I expected to have to make against the trivial numbers I saw them doing. Instead, it said, no, a roof won't protect you from climate change. And no, today's temperature GDP variation tell you absolutely nothing about what's going to happen with climate change. And by the way, no means no. It doesn't mean yes. I say that because, I mean, I've mentioned a few times the Lenten, the distortion of Lenten that the Nordhaus was involved in, but I'll show you guys this one again. I'll be presenting this later on today. But here is what Lenten and co. concluded, that you should not use a smooth function for climate change. You'd be lulled into a false sense of security. The Arctic and in Greenland are likely to tip this century, and the Arctic may have already been tipped, okay? And then you read Nordhaus's summary of it, and here it is. The most important tipping points have a threshold temperature of 3 degrees or higher, or a timescale of at least 300 years. No critical tipping elements for less than 300 years and less than the 3 degree increase, so like 5 degrees Fahrenheit increase. And he's calling that a summary. Now that is a outright, a kid would call that a lie.
We could take the elements of these videos with Kane, and we could, like for that one, for example, you could put that side by side and just put these videos out there like little firecrackers, and just say, look, we got 3 levels. There's the business model of what they want. Then there's the obliging economists that show them what's happening. Then there's the people that are pro action, and they believe in climate change, but their models are massively minimizing. And then you have the reality level. And I think just this type of idea, just imagining these 4 strata in your imagination would be an advance so when people hear stuff, they know what kind of bullshit is being pulled and how it's working.
Yeah, we've got to identify that.
All right. Well, that's something that I could probably work on. I mean, I do think that to try and strategically, put ourselves out there on some of these, these videos. That particular video was, 20, 30,000, views. I think. I don't know. I don't know if I have it still, but.
But I mean, they have really good diagrammatic and animation software where there's little figures moving around, and actually the software does everything for you. So with Keen's voice, we could have someone talking in the ear of an economist, the economist writing a certain paper, and then the camera jumps up to look at the actual research, and then there'll be laughing faces when they compare the research to the summary, like this happened like that. You can imagine an arrow going across, and then an X goes on the arrow to show that inference is false, but then you show how that feeds back into the policy chain and the policy, and then you have a little animation of a little factory spewing clouds, and then at the end you have skeletons and mutants. I think people need to have things simplified like that to understand how does policy fit into a chain reaction, and what is a chain reaction? What does it mean to have a nonlinear chain reaction? How come the slope between 70 and 72 degrees in Florida, it really isn't the same type of slope you get when things get significantly past that in other places? Like Steve's always talking about. I mean, these are ideas that if we could reduce them to cartoonish, drawn elements, would even saturate like the Trump Republican consciousness, and they'd be like, honey, it is true that when a white ball hits a black ball, the black ball moves. I believe, honey, I'm thinking maybe it's not all God. Maybe causality is related to the meteorology. Maybe causality is actually in meteorology. I mean, it could be a revelation of these people.
It's worth doing. I mean, the thing is, we don't get enough views. I mean, like on my own videos, I'm lucky to crack 10,000 views for a video. So I've got a few that have gone past that, but a lot. And you see videos like things like Nordhaus that have a couple of million minimum. Yeah. And the result is that they're winning the public relations war. The only war they're losing is against reality. Yeah. And unfortunately, it'll only become obvious after reality says, terribly sorry, your estimates are nonsense. I don't care what you think. This is what's happening. And, that's why I think to some extent the storms we've seen this year, the fires and so on, are just a warm-up. Oh, yeah. And the thing is, the scale that we have to think about here is, not quite astronomical, but it's geological. I mean, we worry about a storm wiping out a town in Germany. A couple of hundred people died in that storm you would have seen about 2 months ago. But that's still not geological. That's not like, a storm surge flooding the whole Benelux region, which is feasible if the AMOC breaks down and we have these temperature increases as well. So and I can't fault, to some extent, I can't fault people about this because we're not Vulcans, okay? We've never been the rational calculators that neoclassicals like to assume we are, while showing that they're delusional themselves. So we don't sort of say, oh, this is a potential danger, we should do various things to avoid it. The two times we've done that, I think, are the Y2K bug and the hole in the ozone layer, okay? But they were doable within the existing economic system. This is saying you can't continue with this economic system. And that's the message that just is not going to get through anyway. And economists have made sure we don't even get the news.
Well, and it's so cultural, the rebuttals, because, there's a lot of people, Scott's an American, I'm Canadian, we're a little bit more socialist, but, there's people that as soon as you hear anything socialist, they want to break down and absolutely think it's the Antichrist that it's one goose step away from Mao and Hitler, just anything to do with a social program.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to get a lot worse than Mao and Hitler coming out of this. If I think Mad Max had the best summary of what the future is going to be like.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
and the other thing is, even if you have a total catastrophe model, they'll do what Shapiro just did, which was implicit to what he was saying was this. Well, I mean, the changes we make now, if we abided by these accords, wouldn't make a difference anyway. So if we are screwed, we're screwed. I mean, even if all the factories shut down now, we'd still be screwed according to their models. So if crisis, still the conclusion is therefore, fuck it, don't do anything anyway, because no change now will lead to a significant change later. So actually we're screwed. So actually we're off the hook either way. If there's no crisis, yay. If there is a crisis, yay, we get to continue because it's too late.
Yeah, I mean, we're waiting to see what happens when we start seeing, truly planetary effects out of the increase in temperature, and we're only beginning to see it start. Because the question is, we don't have time to redirect and maintain the current standards. So I think we'll ultimately be forced into those people's worst nightmare. Yeah. The only systems that are going to survive this are going to be draconian, top-down, authoritarian, control on consumption, control on life in general. And it's only a question whether you have that at a low scale, so you get Mad Max, or a national scale, so you get an authoritarian regime in a country controlling whether you can have children or not. Mainly not. And then in the Mad Max case, you can't sustain a manufacturing system. You can't sustain a high level of human civilization. In the authoritarian ones, you possibly can, to some degree. So authoritarianism is going to win, courtesy of these people trying to defend freedom.
That's right, because they had to have the little piggies have their way. You can't have any regulation. It's better to have no regulation and then a complete disaster, because then the piggies get to enjoy some duration of supreme pleasure for themselves and their children.
Yeah, that's probably a large part of it. I mean, they're getting a ball out of it right now. I mean, they live a lot damn so better than any of us on this podcast live. So they're benefiting out of their perspective. And this is what I saw back in the 70s when I was involved in student revolts over the teaching of economics. You get this vision of the 60s and 70s generation, radical change, blah, blah, blah. Then I went to the law school and I saw the people at the law school and they were doing very nicely, thanks very much, out of the current system. And with banks providing them with money for their ventures and so on and all the spending, life is going to be damn good. And they were really the dominant group out of the 60s. The radicals who tried to challenge things were a minority. And so because they've got money on their side and we don't, the capacity to resource what they want to do swamps anything we can do as a minority. So we're stuck with them until we hit the ship hits the iceberg, and then it might be on for young and old. But in that case, they're going to still try to cover their asses and claim they warned us.
I think Hanno would have some added. Professor Robert Hanno, he's a philosopher. He I think would have something to add to that conversation. Kind of an outsider in terms of stepping away from professional philosophy. So we talked to him on that regularly. Steve, so the paper that you wrote, is this something that the average person can download? If so, we should put it in the chat or send me the link.
The globalizations paper is readable, but it's actually now behind a paywall.
Okay.
There's another one of my blog posts.
Or we could make a video summary of it and call it video summary of your paper. I think that'd be really helpful.
Not a bad idea. And the next paper is currently on Archive, which is a repository for working papers that haven't yet been refereed, and that's physically available, but that's full of mathematics, so that'd potentially freak an ordinary audience out. But we could do a video summary. Would be a damn good idea.
You can just read the abstract slowly, and then one day we could have animation to go with the abstract, and then it would really start getting traction. I'm not kidding. Diagram.
I think you're right. I know you're right. Yeah.
I mean, because I think there is going to be some momentum behind this, right? There really is. So, pick our content creation strategy, that does make the most sense. So I would like to actually get into a live event at some point, really rather sooner than later. I think we were going to, jump behind your Patreon or something, or put a live stream on your Patreon or something.
That's feasible. That can be done through YouTube. It's going to be a YouTube channel. We can make it available just to patrons or make it publicly available depending on the audience. Yeah.
Okay, so I have to look at that in YouTube. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, because we do a lot of, live events and stuff like that. But the key is you need to have, I'd say, at least 50 people that are tuning into the live event. Otherwise, it turns up to be a live event and then nobody's there. Or, onesie twosies or something like that, right?
I could probably get 50 of my patrons would turn up. I mentioned if we did it through Patreon.
Yeah, and that's, so I'm okay. Well, let me put something together on that and watch for the, what time would work the best for that? Because I don't know if our regular time would work well.
That's.
Sorry, Steve. I wasn't thinking. I can record the same way we record now, and then I can put it into a pre-recorded live stream. So and then we can release that at any time. That way we could actually chat with the with anybody who's on the live event.
Or we go the other end of the spectrum. So like if I do it late, like 10 p.m., then it's 10 a.m. for you guys, and it's sort of midday for Europe. So the best time for a live show is late for me. Like in some ways, to make it possible for Australians to watch, and maybe New Zealanders, then 7 p.m. my time is as late as possible. But if you get that audience and say, okay, let's just go for Asia, Europe, and America, then you'll be looking at about 10 p.m. my time.
Okay. Well, and here's the thing: I can pre-record it and release it at whatever time, right? So I could even release it at 3 times. If we had to, it's not a big deal.
You record it once with a live audience and then broadcast again after that. Sure.
Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left. Is your brain scattered a little bit because you're doing fine, obviously you always do, but are you thinking a lot about the presentation you're going to make today? Yeah,
this has been an interesting one because I've given a heavy presentation at the OECD before on this topic. This one will have myself and Tim Lenton as well. And Tim is the climate scientist whose work has been contradicted by Nordhaus and then used as a justification for not including tipping points. So I hope this is going to be a cognitive dissonance event for the attendees. The attendees will include some of the people who are known as ambassadors to the OECD, so all the country representatives there, and hopefully enough people tuning in from the outside. But I've been saying Lenton has been distorted by Nordhaus. Lenton will be there to say he's been distorted by Nordhaus. So that may have a bit more impact on the audience. And again, I think also that the weather events we're seeing, it happened in enough countries, some bizarre weather events so far this year, that may be enough to say, hey, maybe this climate change is more serious than we thought.
So, Steve, you certainly don't pull any punches on this show, and we've all, I guess, dropped our own number of F-bombs or whatever it is. So, in a presentation like this that you're giving, I'm assuming you're still going to be very forceful and direct.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they'll get the point.
I won't drop F-bombs, but otherwise I'll be direct.
Yeah, they'll get the point if they're listening. I mean, it should be a fast way to cut through the dissonance, I guess. We'll see.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's good. And then I think, what happens to your paper once it gets released on the journal after the referee stage? What?
Well, then we've submitted to two. The first place we've submitted to is the Royal Society, proceeding to the Royal Society, and that will probably come out open access initially. And the Royal Society is the journal that the journalists themselves have to report on. So, like they could ignore my globalization paper got ignored by the media, but if this comes out in proceedings of the Royal Society, along with Lenton being a co-author, then I think that would get a fair bit of coverage.
Yeah. And
the other one is a letter to PNAS. Proceeding to the National Academy of Sciences. That's one crazy acronym. But the letter is currently being reviewed. We have to change how we do the bibliography. That's the only change necessary. So once we've done that, the letter could turn up, and the letter is basically saying, this paper you've just published by Dietz and Wagner is nonsense and really should never have been published. So that also, I hope, will cause a bit of controversy.
Well, I don't want to repeat the second journal name because it's a bit of a mouthful, but the
PNAS will do fine.
But that's odd. I guess Scott probably knows as well. But so two different journals. You'd think that if it gets accepted with the Royal Society, they're like, okay, the formatting's good, but it's all different, and one wants a biography one way.
These are using LaTeX, which is a mathematical word processor that I looked at 30 years ago and decided I'm working hard enough understanding Mathematica and doing programming, and at that time I was doing in DBase and PC Express and SQL. I don't want to learn another programming language to print a document out, which I thought was a bad decision. Fast forward now, and working with LaTeX to get this done has been a total pain in the ass. And the classic is that the reason the letter has been sent back to us is because we're using alphabetic referencing. So rather than like we have Dietz 2021 page, they want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I went back to LaTeX to change it from alphabetic to numeric. Oh, it did that, but it then put the numerics in alphabetic order, which is not what the journal wants. I haven't got a fucking clue how to set up LaTeX to do that. So I've got to say, one of you LaTeX geniuses, you work out what code is necessary so the references occur in citation order rather than alphabetical order. And this is supposed to make my life easier.
Yeah.
That's a shame. Yeah,
as much as I have criticisms of Word, I'm loving working in Word again because I saw somebody tweeted about this, which I found quite funny. I complained on Twitter about how painful LaTeX was to use, and a LaTeX expert wrote back saying, "Word, what you see is what you get, but not necessarily what you want." And then LaTeX, what you see is what you deserve, you useless piece of shit.
So I gather that you were using the Microsoft Word equation editor for your paper.
Yeah, me too. Which is quite good. I mean, I use MathType as well, but like the only reason to use LaTeX is because it's built for mathematical formatting. But as a word processor and as a vehicle for getting your ideas across, oh holy shit! Give me a WYSIWYG, even with its flaws, where I can see all my text and I don't get overwhelmed by formatting marks to try to read. Is that a comment? Is that a feature? Have I got a curly bracket in the right place? I mean, you end up, rather than being able to focus on what you want to write and ignoring the formatting, with LaTeX, you spend your whole time making sure the formatting's right. And what was I writing about again?
But there's software you can use where you can write it in Word and then copy it and paste it in LaTeX and everything be fine except equations. So write your paper and just leave ellipses for the equation parts, and then that's the only latex you have to do. Everything else will be pasted in automatically.
Yeah, we do that in future. I think it's much easier to work with Word and transfer to LaTeX than go the other way.
And they have software where you can type in LaTeX on one side of the window. You know this. On the right side, it'll show you the WYSIWYG.
Yeah, but it doesn't work all that well. I mean, again, if you delete a curly bracket, then all hell breaks loose. And where's the curly bracket? I mean, the fact that it uses a single curly bracket rather than a 2-character sequence, that alone is a problem, because it means you can type something as on your keyboard and fuck up the document. Whereas nobody types 2 curly brackets in a row. Why didn't they use 2?
That's right. You make it easy to find. Either make it a unique symbol or make it a double or a triple that you never find naturally.
Yeah, and that's I mean, so I'm very glad I made the decision 30 years ago not to waste my time working out how to drive LaTeX.
Well, Stephen, I suggest let's solve climate change first, and then next thing we'll do is
six word processes after that. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
In the meantime, just use Emacs, because when you use Emacs, it automatically finds any missing curly brackets for you square, regular, or curly. So it'll blink twice. So if you add a curly bracket here, even if it's 1,000 miles away, it'll make the other guy show up. So you always know where the partner is, and then it's never alone.
Yeah, but better than overlay, that's for sure.
Too bad we couldn't do that with photons, hey? I mean, okay, that's it. Steve's got to go. Good luck with today's presentation, Steve.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, bye.
All right.